Elizabeth Wharton Drexel wrote and published a book in 1935 that was an autobiography of her life during the Gilded Age of America in New York City. The book is entitled King Lehr and the Gilded Age, and it covers the time before, during, and after her tormented marriage to America's court jester, Harry Lehr. Harry Lehr was born Henry Symes Lehr, but he called himself Harry. In the Gilded Age, he was dubbed high society's court jester because of his wit and desire, actually a compulsion, to make the ladies of the court laugh and enjoy his company so much that they lavished their money on him. Harry had no money of his own and learned early how to manipulate the hearts and minds of the rich and famous socialites of New York's Gilded Age to his advantage. Harry made his living off of his charm, his wit, and his good looks. Wealthy society socialites paid for his accommodations, dressed him in expensive suits, and bought him expensive watches and jewelry and anything else his heart desired. He lacked nothing and never ever had to pay for a meal. He was always invited to a round of dinners and luncheons all over New York as well as Newport, which was the elite summer playground of the rich. He also acted as the fun-making advisor to the highest-ranking women of society, expertly arranging his patrons' parties, choosing the flowers, leading the cotillion dance, selecting lovely favors, advising them on their attire, jewels, and even their troubles. So much so that he had rapidly grown indispensable to most of the elite society matriarchs, including the self-styled funmaker herself, Mrs. Mamie Fish, for whom he once falsely posed as her honored guest, His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of Russia, as a joke leading to the moniker, King Lehr. Mamie Fish was known as the hostess of highly sought-after dances, balls and parties that had odd little twists and entertainments, many of which were planned in collusion with Harry Lehr always by her side. I did a video about her called The Bizarre Parties and Oddities of Mamie Fish in HBO's The Gilded Age. You can find it in my list of videos for my channel. That video fills you in on Mrs. Fish's parties and talks minimally of Harry, but in the video I do mention that the real-life Harry Lehr was a closeted gay man that was married to a woman by the name of Elizabeth Wharton Drexel. When I learned about Harry's wife, I was so intrigued by her story that I wanted to do some more research, which resulted in this video because that is, well, what I do. Elizabeth Wharton Drexel's life is an interesting one, and while we might feel sorry for her for what happened during her tormented marriage to Harry, and with good reason which I will get to shortly, I think it is good to know the whole story of her life so we can also see her as a woman who endured for her own reasons, even as she lived a privileged life. Elizabeth Wharton Drexel was born into money and nobility. Her father was a wealthy banker, as was her grandfather, who established the banking house of Drexel and Company, which became one of the largest banks in the United States. Her mother was Lucy Wharton, a descendant of the Duke of Wharton, presumably Philip Wharton, 1st Duke of Wharton of England. Elizabeth was born on April 22, 1868, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was a happy child until her loving father died when she was very young. Elizabeth adored her mother, who believed in the old standards of a Puritan ancestry and worshipped Queen Victoria of England as the standard of the good and dutiful wife. In this video, you will discover that Elizabeth was married 3 times, each bringing its own individual heartbreak. Her story begins with her first marriage to John Vinton Dahlgren, whom she married at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City on June 29, 1889. It was a happy marriage based on mutual love and which bore 2 sons. But it also brought with it heartbreak, twice. First, when one of her sons died in infancy, and then again 11 years into the marriage, when her beloved husband John died after years of struggling with tuberculosis. In her book she writes, "With him died my youth." 2 years after John Dahlgren's death, Elizabeth had the great misfortune to marry Harry Lehr. When she first met Harry, she was lonely, and Harry made her laugh, and he courted her with displays of affection. He proclaimed his love for her and even went so far as to say he could make her happy if only she would marry him. At first, she was not sure of any love for him, but she did feel sincere friendship and affection. But eventually, by the day of the wedding, Elizabeth found herself in love with the charming man who had worked so hard for her affections. They married in June 1901 in the same cathedral that Elizabeth had married her first husband. She was happy and anticipated a second marriage comprised of love and devotion. But it turned out not to be, and never would be what she had so desperately hoped for. On their wedding night, Elizabeth waited excitedly for her new husband. She ordered a luxurious dinner with Harry's favorite champagne to be delivered to the dining room of their hotel suite. She dressed especially for him in a rose brocade gown with a diamond brooch in hopes he would think her beautiful and alluring. She had even bought a cabinet of cigars for him and a gold and enamel watch as her wedding gift to him. But he did not join her for dinner, and instead he dined apart from her, waiting for her to get the message. It was a message he wanted her to understand fully. Later in the evening, he came by to tell her that she must never expect to be alone with him, ever. In fact, he wanted nothing to do with her, and he loved only his mother and no other woman. Women repulsed him, he said. He expected her to act in public like a dutiful wife, and he, in turn, would display courtesy, respect, and apparent devotion while out in public, going about his busy social life no differently than before. "But why did you marry me?" she asked. "For her money, of course." Harry glared at her and told her that she must provide him a marriage settlement where she would pay him $25,000 a year as pocket money to spend on his mother and whatever else he wanted. Plus, Elizabeth was expected to cover all the expenses of their life together as well. In her book, King Lehr and the Gilded Age, Elizabeth tells of her shock and dismay at what her husband turned out to be. A greedy, mean man who continued to abuse her verbally throughout their marriage of 28 years. She recounts the many times that he was rude, mean, and critical to her. How he refused her any politeness at all when they were alone and out of the public eye. How disparaging he was about her appearance when he would make mean comments to her under his breath, so that no one else would hear. At this point, you might wonder, as I did, why Elizabeth chose to stay that night. What compelled her to listen to the demands of this man she suddenly did not know and agree to meet his monetary needs? After all, divorce was not as uncommon as it used to be. American socialites of the same set, such as Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, had divorced her husband 5 years before, and it was starting to become a trend, so why not just divorce him? Annulment was also on the table since the marriage was never consummated, so it does not make sense to us modern women of today to stay with a man so abusive and mean. The answer to that question is threefold. At first, after the shock of her wedding night, Elizabeth called upon her pride to stay in the marriage. She writes, "My pride at least was left to me. No one should suspect the agony of disillusion and humiliation through which I had passed, the bitter irony of my pose as a young happy wife." She mentions her pride again when she wrote, "He was incessant in his demands for money, and still more money. I gave it to him with open hands, never even discussed his extravagance. I found a fierce satisfaction in the giving, it salved my pride a little. He had married me for my money, and for that alone, well, he should have it." Secondly, and what I think is the real reason, is that she did not want and could not ever disappoint her mother. Elizabeth knew that to her mother, divorce was an unbearable disgrace, since her mother had once said that the Queen of England did not countenance divorce, and neither would she. Elizabeth knew that divorce was not something her mother could ever accept. And later in her marriage, when Elizabeth met a man whom she fell in love with, and he with her, she still didn't leave Harry. She almost did, but on the fateful night when she went to her mother's house to say she was divorcing Harry, she found her mother frail from a heart condition and old age. Her mother's nurse told Elizabeth that any shock could be the end of her mother. Not only that, but her mother was nostalgic about her own happy marriage and said she was so proud of Elizabeth for having had a happy marriage as well. So that was the night that Elizabeth could have freed herself from her tormented marriage to Harry Lehr. But she did not. She sent a note to her lover refusing his offer of marriage. He left the United States and went to Europe, never to return. Elizabeth stayed with Harry until he died on January 3, 1929, from a brain tumor operation at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. Elizabeth was in Paris, ironically staying with Consuelo Vanderbilt, who had divorced her own husband years before and was now happily married to the man she loved. Elizabeth wrote in her book, "And now it was all over. The tragic farce of our marriage had ended." Elizabeth married a third time at the age of 64, 6 years after the death of Harry. She married John Beresford, 5th Baron Decrees, a lord of Irish nobility. The marriage landed her a title of Baroness Decrees. He was 70 and died 8 years later, but not before he had filed suit for divorce in 1942, we don't know why, which Elizabeth contested, so it appears they remained married until his death on January 31, 1944. Elizabeth died 6 months later in London on June 13, 1944. She was buried in the crypt below Dahlgren Chapel at Georgetown University, which she and her first husband had built as a memorial to their son, Joseph Drexel Dahlgren, who had died in infancy. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos on the many fabulous, fierce, and feisty women in history.